Thank you. First of all, it's been a great empirical study for me to be here tonight. I'm beginning to understand why nothing ever gets done in French-speaking countries. You do love to talk, I notice that. Normally, I'm being introduced by my boss as Steen, the chief economist. He has predicted 5 of the last 2 crises. It takes a little longer in Belgium, apparently, to understand it. But I have to say, it's nice for once to be in a room where I'm the most optimistic guy. I understood a small part of the French being talked with Olivier and Philippe, and I understand you need solutions. So I guess that's why they brought in the Northern Scandinavian guy to finish this speech today. Because I can do it in 15 minutes, what they couldn't do in 1.5 hours. So let me say this. I've been doing this job for 30 years. I am the most optimistic I've ever been about the future. For one reason only. It simply cannot get any worse. It's actually so bad that I found this on the internet. 20 years ago, we had Johnny Cash, Bob Hope, and Steve Jobs. Now we have no Cash, no Jobs. But the most important thing is we have to pray that Kevin Bacon doesn't die, because then we have no breakfast either. No, and I mean this, and I know I understand why we could be very negative. The whole scenario about the inability of the political establishment to do anything, the inequality in societies, the non-solution to Greece issues. But you have to remember, the only time we ever change on a personal level as a society is when we face a crisis. I actually have a theory, not that I'm ever going to be a politician, but if I ran for office, I would run on the following platform. I will promise you only one thing. I will do absolutely nothing for the full circle of my political office. And the proof, of course, is Belgium. You're without a government for 18 months. It's probably the best 18 months you had in your economy ever. The only time in American history where they ran a budget surplus was during the presidency of Clinton. Name me one thing he did politically except for smoking cigars. He did nothing for 8 years, and it's the most profitable situation ever for the US economy. Every year for Christmas I sit down and I write a letter to Santa Claus. And by the way, Santa Claus is in Greenland. So if your wishes hasn't come through yet, it's because you're writing to the wrong one. So I write to Santa Claus in Greenland and I ask him, Mr. Santa Claus, despite being 50 years old, I would love to have just one wish granted. Could you please take all of the world's politicians, all of the world's central bankers, all of the world's chief economists, and then put in a call to the Prime Minister of Australia and ask him to borrow you a plot of land, put in tennis courts, swimming pools, restaurants, casinos, prostitutes, whatever these guys use, and you close it up for 4 years. I promise you, Santa Claus, the French would only be talking for 35 minutes instead of 2 hours. Growth in the world would be exactly where it should be, 2–2.5%. Inflation would be 1%. We would have no problem with social issues. That is the truth you need to understand. So, to explain this very simplistically, I'm an economist, I need a theory. I mean, I cannot die without having a theory. So I came up with a theory, and I called it the economic Bermuda Triangle. Because what we've tried to explain all night is, how can we, at the same time, have record high valuation, the biggest inequality in history, low productivity, and high unemployment, and the lowest volatility, political noise ever in history, relatively speaking. How can that be? Well, first of all, look at yourself. You're the most boring, average, non-committed generation ever in history. You couldn't care less, could you? You sit here and complain today in French, but every time you have an opportunity you complain. But where's the solution? Where's the commitment? Where's your political work? You're the most average, bland, boring generation ever in history. You're also the biggest entitlement generation in history. All through your life, year after year, you have been stacking up on entitlements given you in a bartering process where you did nothing to gain what you did. No one is better than this than the French. So the entitlement keeps us in place because the sad truth about democracy is it only works until 51% of the population benefits from transfer from the public sector. When you pass the 51% of all the GDP being generated by the public sector, you create a political class who is totally rational to want one thing: status quo. So I'm one of the few probably economists in the world that think that Syriza getting power in Greece is a great thing. Not because I condone, not because I'm a Marxist, but from the pure fact that I come from a generation of the most boring center-left, center-right, couldn't tell the difference political system. Now at least we have a proper left, we also in some countries have a proper right, but a full spectrum politically is exactly what we need. Because unlike what my neighbors in Sweden did to keep the anti-immigration vote out of parliament in terms of power, they should be empowering them to look stupid, to be on a platform, being on a stool, talking about how idiotic all these ideas are. Instead, we're trying to exclude them. We have this Islamic phobia as well. You know, trust me, there are idiots in every single religion I ever encountered. And I go to 35 countries, so I do see a few religions. So we have to stop that. We have to be inclusive. We have to make sure that we have a discussion. And what is the best dinner party to attend? Isn't that the one where we disagree about everything? You know, where does growth come from? The big problem, I mean, I couldn't care. I'm also boring, but I couldn't care that you are boring. But what I'm as an economist is concerned about is, where does growth come from? It comes from a full political spectrum. It comes from a full range of interest in society, an education system that allows, you know, the arts education that doesn't actually lead anywhere to exist. But instead now we have compliance, we have tick in the box, we have to comply with every single rule. The EU system is putting one rule after the other after us. We are so boring, we don't even recognize how boring we are. So we need to create the spectrum politically in our society, and we need to disagree about everything to create it. But the second part of the Bermuda Triangle is a more interesting one. And by the way, I'm very disappointed. You know, the Nobel Prize was just given in economics. I have to be honest, I was sitting around waiting for my phone to call. Because I actually have a theory where I can explain how we got here, why we are here, and how we get out of it. But I guess no one wants practical solutions, right? But I think the main reason I didn't get it is very simple. Do you know where the Nobel Prize is given? Stockholm. And this bloody Swedes have never given anything to a Dane in history, so that's probably the main reason I didn't get it. The only thing you need to learn from me, anything you need to know about economics is in this slide. It's called the 80-20 rule. So think about this. Now I'll explain to you why you have the Bermuda Triangle in place. Low productivity, high unemployment, and high stock market valuation. Just stay with me for 2 minutes and you will understand this perfectly. So 20% of all economies in the world is listed companies on the stock exchange and banks. That's the 20%. The 80% is small and medium-sized enterprises. The business guy, the local corner store, all these guys. So 20-80. Right now, quantitative easing, all political capital, so 100% of all credit, 100% of all political capital is given to the 20%. 0% is given to the 80%, political capital, 0 to the 80%. So the reason why we have high stock market valuations is that relative to a normal business cycle, the 20% is getting an input cost in terms of capital cost, which is 300, 400 basis points lower than a normal business cycle. And if you put that into a spreadsheet, of course you get infinite returns. I can actually go down to a bank in Brussels tomorrow and say, I will open 100 hamburger stands on the corner, and I'm going to have infinite profit, because in a spreadsheet, at 0% interest rate, everything has an infinite return. So the first part, why do we have the high stock market rating? Simply because the 80% is subsidizing the 20% through the mechanism of monetary policy and the political capital, which always goes to the bigger companies and the banks. The problem, however, is that even the EU, which I sort of, at least as an institution, is probably one of the most stupid in the world, because they always have a compromise for everything, and compromise is exactly the last thing we need in the world. But even the EU have figured out that 85% of all jobs created in a society comes from what? The SME sector. 100% of productivity comes from the SME sector. So the picture we have created, the monetary policy we conduct today, is entirely based on keeping companies alive that create zero jobs and zero productivity. Now you have your Bermudes triangle in place. So how does it break down? Well, it breaks down when you get Syriza, who doesn't want to play ball. It breaks down when you get the full noise of the system, like the energy prices collapsing 50%. Do realize that in 2008 and 2007, when the crisis initiated, it was all to do with the energy prices going up. It's exactly the reason why my good French colleagues are wrong. The economy will improve by the simple fact that you're just giving back free. It's exactly the reason why my good French colleagues are wrong. The economy will improve by the simple fact that you're just giving back $3 trillion worth of purchasing power to the economy. You are taking $3 trillion away from sovereign wealth funds, buying the dip in the stock market every time it goes down, from rogue states that have no interest in capitalistic market or in the marketplace, and giving it to consumers and businesses. And you know what? Who benefits the most from low energy is not you as consumers, because I am absolutely 100% certain that your government will tax you more. If energy prices stay low, you will be taxed more. But the private businesses, the little factories, all these guys, they have an electricity bill this year which is 25, 40, 50% lower. Goes directly to the bottom line. That means they can afford to have an extra apprentice. It means they can invest in a new program, or they can do stuff. So this is the biggest boost. And the interesting things, it comes from doing nothing. For the first time this year, Portugal, Spain, and Greece even is more competitive than Germany. In 1999, Germany bought themselves a pause from being competed against. This year, unit labor cost is lower in Portugal. When I go to Portugal, people are flying into open factories. In Germany, people are flying out to close down factories. We're seeing a huge migration of jobs to the southern Europe. We will see a huge migration to the Eastern Europe, because finally inside Europe we have areas which is embedded into Europe, which have a lower salary structure that allows us to compete staying inside Europe. So when Europe comes back, and it will be pretty bad before it gets better. But when we get into the second half of this year, as we go out of this year, I'm sure inflation and European growth is coming back. But it will be Portugal, it will be Spain that comes first. It will not be Germany. Germany is done, gone, and finished.
Kaput.
Kaput. Because they have not renewed. Which leads me to the present state of the world, which is, think about it. I think Mr. Market is trying to tell us things are coming back. And this is to make the circle full. So what is really happening is that energy being down 50%, foreign exchange exploding, SMB, the Swiss National Bank, seeing the Swiss franc revalued by 38% overnight, the Singapore giving up its trading ban. These are all signs that the business cycle is being reactivated in the economy. The few things they cannot control, the politicians, the central bankers, and the chief economists, is the price of energy, which is coming down. So energy becomes the kickstarter, not from just the flow going from the 20% to the 80%. The bad news is for your stock portfolio, it's bad news, because when you create jobs, when you invest, the return on equity has to come down first before it goes up. The good news is we will have productivity innovation that will deal with peak oil if you believe in it. If you don't believe in it, it doesn't matter. But the fact is, every time we have faced a crisis in history, we dealt with it. And that's why if and when Greece leaves the euro, it's good news. It's good news for Greece, it's good news for us, because we can start anew. Instead of having a system which is statically staying at a 0-0, it's like watching a 0-0 game, watching Europe right now, right? Every single match we watch is 0-0. You can put your money on it's going to be 0-0. I even think the crisis with Ukraine and Russia is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Russia to start anew, to get Putin out of the place. I think what you need to embrace is the fact that as you go to a dinner party, you rather find something you disagree with. You also have to accept confrontation, breakdowns is, at the end of the day, a sign of a capitalistic system. It's part of a business cycle, and that's exactly why we have to be so positive. So I'm not joking when I started by saying I am the most optimistic in 30 years. Because everywhere I look, I agree with Olivier Philippe. Everything is breaking down. But that is the good news. Good news is that you can now invest. And if you want to make money, by the way, and make excess return for the next 10 years, you have to invest in education, education, and education. Funny enough, right? The best thing is, in an average year, I go to 35 countries. I can do the exact same speech in 33 out of those 35. Switzerland is probably the only place I can't do it because they got the proper business model, if you think about it. They allow their currency to be exposed to foreign markets. So the only way they stay competitive is through innovation, education system, infrastructure, and a tax system that taxes people locally. The opposite model is Bank of Japan and Europe overall. We want to export our problems to someone else. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. When everybody's trying to devalue their currency, we are back at square zero. So this is a great opportunity for investment. It's a great time to be investing in people. You should stop reading PowerPoints. You should stop reading a spreadsheet and just invest in people, what they believe in. The problem is you're so boring you would probably not even recognize it when it comes through your door. But let me say this, and I know it's very provocative, but I really think we have a responsibility to step up. It's not going to be Merkel, it's not going to be Draghi who saves us. It is our own ability to look beyond the next 3 months, the next 6 months that will save us going forward. And the market is telling us they are ready to move. The market is ready to give us the ammunition to deal with this. So, what you need to understand is that everything which is macro, as I said, is negative. Any society that doesn't grow has too much macro. Anything successful is a microeconomy. It is the fact that you can deal with any crisis. Your great parents went through 2 world wars. They were drinking coffee that wasn't coffee. And now you're sitting here and you're complaining in several languages about how tough things are and the debt and the politicians. But as my dad always says to me, Steen, stop complaining about these politicians. You have exactly the quality of politicians you deserve because you vote for them. So take responsibility for the process. And the model we have is a denial and protest and a circular motion. But once in a while we have a mandate for change. Can anyone tell me on top of their heads the last European politician to go into an election wanting to change? Who was that?
Winston.
Who?
Winston.
Winston is a good one, but it's the same country and it's a lady with a handbag. 1979. We haven't had a single politician since 1979 who wanted to challenge the system. That's my point. Now we have someone who's willing to challenge the system. You may like him, you may not like him, you may disagree, you may say he's a Marxist. It's not even a party, by the way, Sarissa. I think people need to realize it's a coalition. But I think it will go down in history as the Thatcher moment, where someone said no thank you to this deal. Because we are trained to understand that everything has a solution, everything has a compromise. We are now in a situation, economic, politically, and practically, where there are no solutions to the Greek problem. A lot of the issues we face every single day has no single solution. There's not even a minimax, there's not a Pareto optimal solution for anything anymore. Because someone needs to lose. If we want to deal with Greece's problems, someone needs to be given that debt. That debt has to be paid by you. Someone lose, right? So it's become binary. I mean, we are Europeans. We love to talk as we've seen tonight. We love to sit on the fence and have all kind of views. I mean, we want to democratize all of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, all these places. We're doing great, right, by the way? Aren't we? I mean, it's great success as far as I'm told. Maybe we should stop talking and just acting, right? Maybe that is the lesson that we should be discussing and we should be acting. But we cannot discuss without having a conclusion to what we discuss. And I think we economists, the Econoclastes, has not only the ability, we also have the opportunity to do this. So if we can at least just provoke you to think, invest in people, power, empowerment of what you do. Because no one's going to come and help us. So let me say that the final comment I have is that I really hope that one day you may have the awesome life you pretend to have on Facebook. Because the young people in this room, they live more on Facebook than they live in the real world. And I'm to blame for this, because I didn't take my responsibility seriously. It's better to shut up the kids with the iPad and the Facebook than to talk to them and teach them something, right? We need to change that. I think Facebook, and I'm not even on Facebook, so I'm the wrong guy. I think Facebook is the most detrimental to common sense that's ever happened in history. One public global dating site for people. Get out there, discuss, create noises, disagree on everything I just said. Just do something, push back, do something about what you need to do. Because education and getting better, every rich society that ever survived was because they have a tradition of questioning everything. So at least you have a good starting point from the conversation tonight. But it also needs to lead to some action. And that's where the French, that's where the Belgians, that's where the Danes, we lag behind. There's plenty of people around the world that want to act, but don't have the rights to discuss. I think the superior model is the European one. So finally, I think Europe will come back as a growth engine inside the next 5 to 6 years. But it entails that we embrace challenges that are ahead of us. But again, looking at the evolution, a country like Greece has been more bankrupt than it's been out of bankruptcy. We can deal with any crisis. You can deal with any crisis. And I think that is the hope here. We have to move forward. Thank you.
Do you have any question for Steen?
So if I understand what you say, you are very optimistic about the future because you make assumptions about how the youth is going to behave, which you yourself explain is not going to happen. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Isn't that contradictory?
That we do not know.
Well, you're telling us that
so there's
things
two
are going to
levels.
happen, but you're saying, well, everybody's playing on Facebook, etc. So, where is going to this great energy coming from?
I understand the confusion. So there are two levels. There's a macro level and a micro level. What I'm saying is that as long as you allow the micro level to prevail, the 80% in greater terms, and the macro is not negatively impacting the micro, then you have an ability to survive, because that is the way evolution has always given us. When we break down bankruptcy, greed, all this needs to happen for us to clean the slate and go on. So it's the two levels, a micro level and a macro level. Macro cannot do any more harm to the economy, in my opinion. The micro level is coming back because they're being given lower energy, lower funding costs, in a lot of places also at relatively better exchange rate. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I have a question. Don't you think that it is possible that, given the situation, things might break down in something like riots, revolution, and that we might just end up in a situation where the state needs to take very drastic measures to keep the people calm?
Well, that's certainly the gut reaction from the Paris terrible accidents, that we should need more surveillance, we should be doing more security, and we should keep people in place. But I think my answer is exactly the opposite. I think we need to allow people to express whatever views they have. I think we have to be all-inclusive of all opinions, and if people want to riot in the street and it's done in a proper way, it's fine by me. I mean, it can't get out of control because that's the way it is, but people should be allowed to demonstrate. I think personally that it's appalling that the 1% owns more and more. I mean, trust me, I come from a very libertarian background, and banks certainly, but the banks' profit to GDP is the high in history. The wages to GDP is the lowest in history. It doesn't work like that. No economy can function when 25% of all profit sits in the banks and is distributed to its shareholders. The banks has a huge role in society, but they must never be more than 50% of GDP. If that takes a revolution, I don't care. I mean, I'm a practical economist. I believe that we need to create equal rights to education, equal rights to move the agenda forward. And we talk a lot about, a lot of you say intuitively that is in place. It's not. Yeah, we need to move to a better level. And maybe, as this gentleman is indicating, maybe that's naive. But you know what? I'd rather be naive than just being doom and gloom and waiting for the world to go under and by sitting in my basement polishing my gold bars. And I have to say, I go to, as I said a few times, I go to 35 countries. What is very, very significant, and I understand this, whatever country I go to, whether it's Argentina, South Africa, China, where people face not only just political oppression, but also inability to just do their work because of stupid macro policies. Everywhere I go, I meet smart business people, aggressive students, people who want to be better, people who want to do better. Every day, think about the S&P 500 as a concept. That's 500 CEOs and their employees that work and open the door every day to be profitable. You can't fight that. The compounding of all this positive energy will come through the society. Yes, sometimes we become overvalued and we move from black to white and cold to hot and vice versa. That's part of the way we think. Because you always think you're the most beautiful, most intelligent person in the room. That's why you survive as a person. Maybe not always be the most practical way to look at the world. But I mean, I admire you for it, and that's the way it should be. But it has impracticalities in terms of how we allocate our time and resources. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
You're still not happy?
Yeah, I'm not really happy because I think that the mic is coming back.
Yes, I feel that I see you're optimistic, but what you propose are actually the solution that the business often propose. They are the solution of the S&P 500. Leave the state out of it and let the business
No. Sorry to interrupt you. No, I don't. I make a huge distinction between the 20 and the 80 and the macro and the micro. To me, the 20%, the S&P 500 is actually more part of the 20% than the 80%. If we want to move the agenda, we need to do everything to support the SMEs. That means that every time you introduce a new business regulation, you have to take two away. It means that, if you ask the small business guys around the world, and the point of my story of all these CEOs and business people I meet is that, just leave them alone. They don't even want you to give them tax costs. Just leave them alone for 5 years and they will do great.
Yes, but if you remove the state, how can you protect the small?
Why am I moving the state?
You say, let's get rid of the macro. The macro is the problem.
As long as it's smaller than 51% for the reason I explained to you, I'm fine. I come from a social liberal country. We have one of the worst nursing states in the world. Apparently we're the happiest people in the world. I didn't notice, but apparently we are. I'm not for and against the state. I think it was Roosevelt who said that the state needs to take over where you can't do. To take over what you can't do. That's my definition of the public. I'm for that. I think the education system should be police, justice system, whatever. I'm not against the state. I'm not a libertarian just standing here and wanting business to have more ownership. I want exactly the opposite. I want to stay away. I want the politicians to stop supporting the bigger banks and take all the money you support the banks with and put it into the SME sector. And I guarantee you have exponential growth in the world.
Next.
Yeah, is that a better answer?
I noticed that in your speech you emphasized the unequal distribution of wealth over the last few years, but how responsible do you think the politicians in several developed countries have been in helping this rather small class of people in terms of reducing tax rates and all that kind of measures?
So the incentive structure from emerging markets, you're saying?
No, from developed countries, such as the US.
Luxembourg, whatever.
Luxembourg, Switzerland, these kind of countries, yeah.
I think we can discuss that for days, but it's ending, right? So that's good news. Again, I'm a practical economist. I believe in equal rights I think Europe should have the same corporate tax rate. I think Europe should have to take, if we have one union, we're going to compete against each other. Let's make it the same rules. You don't play a football match with different rules and different regulations, right? Yeah.
I'm a horrible footballer, so I couldn't tell.
but we don't. We play football with the same rules everywhere in the world, right? And that needs to be the case in tax. I agree on that point. But So I don't, you know, it's been part of it, but the bigger part is the 80-20. You know, every time there's a crisis, you pump money into it. I mean, the whole concept of quantitative easing, monetary easing, is that it has a trickle-down wealth effect, as we've seen earlier today. The problem is it doesn't work, because you are smarter than them. You know, the problem is the macro thinks they're smarter than you, but you are smarter than the macro. And that's why, you know, people say, like in Denmark, we have too little private consumption, and the politician and the economist say, oh, you should be spending more money. And people say, why should I spend more money when I don't have any, my real earnings are coming down and the future looks, you know, horrible. I mean, the small consumer is much, much smarter than any economist in the world, in my opinion. Because he has to have his household economy match, zero, right? These days, you can't afford to have a negative balance. So I think what is really going on is we have gone as far of doing nothing and pretending. I mean, I used to call it pretend and extend. Pretend you're credible and extend by buying time. And the best solution was always to go on church on Sunday and pray that the weather would improve on Monday, right? It just doesn't work anymore. You know, you need to do something because, you know, as in the case with Greece, we can ignore the problem in Greece, but also they're bankrupt in 2 months. Take your choice.
Yes, just one other questions, sorry. And when you're thinking maybe then the different problems that we've got, and like the different crises, and for the subprime crisis to 2008, and then finally that we actually right now, that we've got right now is finally then maybe a symptom of the new ideology from the, the ideology ideology from the Chicago school, then in the 80s. I was thinking it's maybe then what we assist just right now is maybe then a symptom of this new way of thinking, this new way of the Chicago school with Milton Friedman, and then are you maybe thinking that it's maybe then something acute because of that, or before we got the way of thinking of Keynes, for example, and right now, then and I think that's maybe so a reason for that. That's finally what's happened on because of that. Or that's just only.
So the question is essentially is that, you know, is it the end of a political solution like the Chicago School or otherwise Keynesian monetarism? I think what we really need to take away as economists, as philosophers from this crisis, is that nothing works at all times, right? There's no one-size-fits solution. And the luxury of going to all these countries every year is that I know in every single country, if you want to solve Belgium's problem, it needs to be done in the history of Belgium's history. What you can get the mandate to create, because, you know, as much as we hate the political process, if you cannot get it through Parliament, you cannot change anything. So I think what we need to learn is kind of a bottom-up analysis saying, what is, you know, sit down in Belgium and decide what are the 3 things you want to be known for. Education, maybe being the best education center in the world, you know, the infrastructure, whatever, just decide. Belgium needs to decide. South Africa needs to do the same exercise. Instead of having this concept that this mercantile theory that we can export our problems away. You know, every single country except for Switzerland in the world is conducting a policy where they export the problems. So I think it's the end of that story. Trade talks, energy talks, global warming talks are breaking down every single day, because these talks can only happen when you have tailwind. I mean, when you have headwind as we have right now, it doesn't work. But that is kind of good news, not for those specific issues, but it's good because we need to have the conversation. So I think the new theory is best practice. My business model is best practice. If we want to discuss something, we take all the far left, the far right, and the middle, and we take them to discuss and take, you know, what can we agree on is the best standard for what we do. That is my model. I gave up on Keynesianism, monetarism, Chicago School, the Danish School, even welfare. I mean, the thing is, like, take welfare. Everyone wants welfare, and then people admire Scandinavia for welfare. The problem is there isn't a single definition of welfare. You have one definition, I have one definition. And if I ask you in a poll, would you rather have more or less welfare? What is the answer? Yes, right? It's a genius construction to have welfare as a word, but know the definition of the words in terms of its practicality. What is the cost? What is the opportunity cost? So I think we will go back to, opportunity cost. And those of you who read economics, there's only one thing you need to learn in economics. It is that everything in a society needs to be allocated to the marginal cost of capital. Everything else is just a waste of bloody time. Marginal cost of capital has to be allocated to the highest return. That's the way society wins. Of course, to measure the highest marginal cost of return could be education over short-term building bridges to nowhere in China, right? So it's difficult to measure, but as a theory, it's a good concept to always have in your head, that marginal allocation. And what we're doing right now is the opposite. We allocate to the most politically connected. Yeah?
We break, just a question on Greece. We break Greece first time in 2010, the second time a year later. They are still bankrupt. Banks had to make a big haircut to their Greek debt portfolio. And wouldn't it be a better thing for Greece to rebuild, to help them to rebuild their economy? The EU Commission has an investment plan of a bit more than 300 billion euros.
Unfunded, of course.
Unfunded, yes. There's a bit leverage. Wouldn't it be a better thing for Greece to give them, say, 10 billion euros on 3 years to rebuild the economy, rebuild the infrastructure, and create new activities and jobs instead of creating them again and again.
Yeah, okay. But that's, now I have to be very careful because I wrote some comment on Greece and people thought I wanted every poor guy to suffer. That is exactly why we need Greece to fail, because Greece needs to have this eureka moment where they decide what they want. What the 3 points Greece wants to be, as my Greek colleagues always tells me, he says, listen, Steen, you got it all wrong about Greece. We are a poor country with very rich people. And think about it, he's right. If you get a devaluation big enough, if you get an incentive to move money into Greece from the overseas Greece in London, New York, Malta, and all these places where they sit, there's a huge fortune that can flow into Greece tomorrow if you set out the opportunistic system. The problem is giving them another $10 billion, even the Greeks will tell you that, would just go to the same people, the same families, the same sort of, and that's what Syriza is about. So you can like and not like Syriza, but Syriza doesn't believe in is continuing what was the status quo. The whole, going to the gentleman's question over here, the whole move in Europe, in my opinion, is not anti-EU. I think bottom line, we're all Europeans, but there's too much Europe. There's too much this noise of giving people who doesn't deserve it. This protectionism of, I think the philosophy really is in Europe that, if we give you some money, you shut up. The money needs to come with responsibility. And I think breaking down is the only way we ever learn something. I'll guarantee you, if you took a conversation with me, the best decision you ever taken is when you have had your wall, your back up against the wall. That's just how we are. Because we think we are the smartest, the most beautiful. But the worst time to take a decision is when you've been playing a football match on the weekends, scored 3 goals, and had sex with a wife. You cannot get any worse to take a decision because you're full of yourself, right? 98% of the time you're full of yourself. The 2% of the time where we are realistic is when we're facing, challenges and we have a deadline, whatever. Why do you think every single article ever in the world is written by students and journalists is written 1 minute before? Because that's where we work the best. So I think we need that crisis. So I'm a firm believer in crisis is good. Not the consequences of the crisis, but the crisis is the mandate for change. So that will be my answer.
I've got the last questions.
When you meet your fellow chief economists from other big banks, how do they react to your theory?
Good question. I speak a couple of times a year together with the central bank governor of Denmark, and first time I spoke, he went to my professor, who was a very famous professor, and said, this Steen Jakobsen, he's out of his mind, he's talking about macro doesn't work, and wherever, and my friend said, yeah, he's one of my students, don't worry. So people like, and the other thing is that I've been asked to give political parties a lot of advice, but I've never been invited back twice. So apparently, there's a reason why I don't get the Nobel Prize. But people don't like it because it actually throws away everything we believe in. And I think, again, behavioral economics tells you would rather have tomorrow be pretty much like it is today, with slight improvement of your salary, of course, and better clothes, whatever. But we want predictability in what we're doing, and that is the problem with what I do. But also understand, I don't necessarily think you're the most boring generation ever, but I think you need to be provoked, because that's the only way I can see. Whether I'm right or wrong, I couldn't care less, to be honest. But if I can just move you 1% or 2% to disagree with me, or push back, or go to another level to just discuss it, that to me, that's success. And I tell you, I mean, I've told audience in 35 countries and central bankers and whatever, none of them has tried to beat me up yet, and I've never been abused for saying it. I mean, I get abused for saying, that I think it's time for Greece to take a decision. Then people abuse me. When I tell people they're boring and average and stupid, they accept it, right? So I think the lesson for me is that I think you all want to discuss this. I think you're willing to take a lot of stick from me because you sort of agree to some extent. I think that is good news, and that's also why I'm more positive than my colleagues. Because I see it around the world. You're all willing to take this discussion with me. But very few pushes back and say you're wrong about the 2080 model, and you shouldn't be getting the Nobel Prize, by the way, and all this. But in central banks, privately they agree 100% with me, which is really scary. I was invited to an offsite with all the central bankers in Switzerland this past May, and I was scared because I'm actually a very simple man. I'm not very good at economics, I'm not very good at math, so I thought I'm by far going to be the stupidest, most non-talk-to guy in the room. Turns out I was the guy everyone wanted to talk to, right? Because they believe in SMEs, they believe in the small business, they understand that growth comes from bottom up, not from top down. But they all feel trapped in an environment where they can't change, basically. They're not going to put up the hand and say, teacher, I was wrong. Imagine if Draghi got up and said, oh, this QE, it doesn't really work, but I have to do it. Which he really is, because look at what he said ever since he announced QE. The only thing he talks about is that QE cannot stand alone without reforms. The only thing I talk about is reforms. Getting reforms comes through a crisis. So I'm sorry to say I even agree with Draghi. Thank you, everyone.
Je tiens vraiment à remercier chaleureusement Steen. Comme nous sommes dans une université, moi il y a une phrase que j'ai retenue dans son intervention, c'est effectivement l'éducation est quelque chose de fondamental. Je pense à un président américain, peut-être Jefferson, qui disait « Si vous pensez que l'éducation coûte trop cher, alors essayez l'ignorance. » Et l'autre phrase, parce que j'adhère aussi à sa conclusion, c'est qu'effectivement, face à des situations imprévues, des situations singulières, il y a peut-être pire, effectivement, que de n'avoir aucune stratégie, c'est de n'en avoir qu'une seule, et ça, effectivement, c'est une leçon que les banques centrales vont devoir en tout cas l'assumer, et assumer les conséquences. En tout cas, merci beaucoup donc, à tous les intervenants, merci à vous tous qui êtes venus nous voir. Vous nous retrouvez bien sûr sur le site des Econoclastes. Surveillez bien aussi nos petits inputs, puisque une lettre trimestrielle est en gestation et je pense qu'on va la...
C'est une gestation d'éléphant, c'est pas une gestation humaine. C'est long.
Ouais. Elle va arriver avant la Saint-Valentin, je pense. Ça sera notre cadeau. Et bien sûr, on va nous retrouver certainement pour notre prochaine conférence. Donc bonsoir à tous et puis retrouvons-nous autour d'un verre dans l'atrium. Merci.